Hey, it's Gerren, and welcome back to More in Common. Today we're switching it up. Instead of one long conversation, I'm bringing you a collection of moments that stuck with me, conversations that challenged, inspired, and reminded me just how many ways there are to connect. Think of this as a highlight reel for the heart and mind. Three stories, three perspectives, all tied together by one idea. When we really listen, stay curious, and show up for each other, we grow.
In a world that often pulls us apart, More in Common brings us back to what matters. Hosted by Gerren Taylor and Keith Richardson, this isn't your average podcast. It's a challenge to think deeper, question louder, and grow further. At More in Common, we work with NFL teams, tech companies, and professionals across industries to improve communication and foster compassion. And with a focus on emotional intelligence, we aim to bring a wealth of experience to help you navigate the complexities of human connection. We've never been more connected and yet more isolated. We want to explore the roots of that tension and offer a way back to what we all need: real human connection. Enjoy the show.
Let's start with a conversation that made me rethink something that I thought I already understood: listening. Allison O'Brien, Director of Listening Intelligence at the Echo Listening Project, joined us to break down how our listening habits, whether connective, reflective, or analytical, shape not only what we hear, but how we're heard. This is about more than just paying attention. It's about knowing your own biases and how adjusting the way you listen can completely change the way that you build trust.
But I think for a lot of people, it's important to step back and talk about first some of the science and the latest research that we know that really defines what listening is and what it isn't, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions out there.
Raising the definition. Like, that's been a theme of the last few, right? Suitcase terms. Let's raise the definition. This is great. Go for it.
So I think the one of the best places to start is just this understanding that we hear with our ears, but we listen with our brain. What I mean by that is, as we're taking in information, we're processing it through the prefrontal cortex in the brain, and we're making sense of what it is that we hear. That's really an important distinction from what most people, I think of listening as is paying attention, or we're good at it, or we're bad at it. And those are really unproductive ways to think about listening, meaning that we're either present or we're not, or that we're good. We have this value assessment on it. What we know to be true from research is that because every brain is different, every individual actually filters information differently. So the three of us can be listening to the exact same information, that's the exact same content, and we might take away three very different interpretations of what we heard. And that's because listening is a brain-based function, and it turns out it's actually a measurable habit. So we come to rely on unique filters over time that become very comfortable for us. And so we tune in to specific types of information, and we might overlook other types of information. So that becomes problematic from the standpoint of alignment at times on a team, in a partnership, a marriage,
Yeah,
with
it
our
sounds like
kids.
when you're not listening or half listening to your partner and they say that one thing and you're like, wait, what? That really gets their attention.
And the thing is, we could be fully committed to listening, and we still take away a different interpretation of what was said than the person who was sitting right next to us, also intently listening. So that's the most critical piece of this, I think, is understanding, because we broadly accept that people communicate differently, meaning they speak differently. But it's a new concept for most people that individuals take in information differently.
I got to be honest. Like, I haven't heard you say that before. And if you've said it to me in the past, I didn't process or register it. This idea that we hear with our ears, but we listen with our brain, totally makes sense to me. And it's one of those hyper clarifying statements where we often get caught in what's the difference between listening and hearing. And, I can say, having gone through coaching, training, and other things, you can be 50-50 split on the philosophical answer to that question. Some people might think hearing is what the other people might think listening is, and vice versa, right? So clearly establishing is like, no, the difference isn't in the philosophical answer to that question. The difference is where you're processing at what level. So you're hearing with your ears and you're listening with your brain. They work together. They are not independent, different philosophical ways of considering it. And I don't know if you've heard of this story, and I don't remember the details, but there was like this teacher, and she wanted to prove the different perspectives. So she had staged this fight with a student, right? So the student came in, stormed in late, and they started fighting, and she kicked him out of the office and all this other stuff. She had a large classroom. And then she assigned everybody in the class to write a story about what they saw.
Okay.
Right? And everybody wrote a different story. Right? Because, it's not just what they heard, it's where they sat in the classroom. It's the perspective, like the vantage point that they have in what they saw. And ultimately everybody wrote a different story. I just share that because of what you just said.
Well, and that happens day in, day out in, almost every interaction that we have, is that we filter through a lot of assumptions that we make. We create a story from the perceptions that we have of other people, their body language, their tone of voice, the words that they choose when they're speaking. So we don't tend to be very objective when we're listening until we learn some of the concepts from this model, I think. Then it can help us step back and acknowledge, wow, I've made an assumption. Maybe I need to shift my perspective a little bit.
I love, we talk about the idea of removing assumptions just as a practical matter of not, we can't remove them, right? They're a functional part of our brain. And it all ties back into our bias. But it is such a complicated effort, right? Like it is a complicated effort. And what I love about this conversation is it starts at the input of information. Is how are we taking one step at a time, looking at the different ways we listen and understanding them as high level as we possibly can, even if it's just to understand that we process information differently. Like you do, I do, Gerren does. And when we can accept that, we can find the little things that allow us to move through. So with that said, I am curious, like now that we've backed up, which I love that you raised the definition of listening and provided that definition. I think it's just so brilliant. We hear with our ears, we listen with our brains. What are the ways that we listen from the echo model in particular?
Yeah.
And maybe you can speak to the ecosystem of listening, analysis, and assessment, but we don't have to get too wonky.
Yeah, I think I'll stay pretty high level with it, but in the research and the development, the scientific validation process of developing this assessment tool, 4 main habits in listening were identified. So that said, some individuals are single dominant in one, meaning they really rely heavily on one habit over others. That's their bias that they're filtering through. We can also be dual dominant. We can be triple dominant. We can be non-dominant.
Oh, the
So what's
flexor.
really important, and I think this is going back to what you were just saying, Keith, is that it all starts with self-awareness. That's the reason why we do any kind of assessment tool, is to gain some self-awareness. What we do with that new insight around ourselves is what's, really important in terms of what comes next. Going back to the 4 habits that we characterize listening into, these filters are quite different. The first habit is connective listening, and this is really an external filter. These are listeners, if they're dominant in this habit, they're filtering through the lens of, what does this information or this interaction mean, or how does it impact other people? There's a highly relational human component to this type of listening. So listeners who really rely on this habit may overlook how they feel personally about something. They may discount their own subject matter expertise or their own perspective in favor of harmony of the group, or of agreement with someone else that they respect or that they trust.
Next up, we're talking about something that's short in supply these days: the willingness to change your mind. In this conversation, we explore what it really takes to bridge divides in a polarized world, the crisis of certainty that so many of us face, and the role of empathy and humility in shifting perspectives. It's not just about winning debates, it's about asking better questions, conceding points when it matters, and remembering that openness isn't weakness, it's the bridge. And I saw the Daily Show host, Jordan Klepper, talking to his audience about, and if people don't know, Jordan Klepper also does like in Trump rallies, he'll talk to people and do interviews, man on the street type interviews with folks about what's going on. But this was a Q&A with some audience members in the studio for Daily Show, and he touched on something that I think that we often talk about here. And here, I'll roll the clip for everybody, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it.
That anything will convince them otherwise?
Anything will convince them otherwise? Here's what I think. Changing somebody's mind is hard to do. And I think if you are approaching something like, I want to change their mind, you ain't going to get anywhere. I think the problem we have right now is a crisis of certainty. I talk to everybody on all sides who are very certain about their beliefs. And if you actually want somebody to see something that they haven't seen before and cross that divide into believing something else, they have to acknowledge that they have a sense of uncertainty. And if they're being approached by somebody else, you have to acknowledge that you have a sense of uncertainty as well. And so I think in order to change somebody's mind, you have to be a bit of a loser to begin. It sounds strange, but you have to concede something to get anywhere. And so is it going to happen on a TV show? Doubtful. But with friends and family, there's an opportunity. One, because there is a connection there and hopefully some love, although I know it's been a hard few years. But I think if you can approach that, not from a place of judgment and from a place of uncertainty, concede something that you don't know. Because guess what? You are probably a lot like me, and you wish you were as certain about the things that you want to be, but you had to put up these guards because people are coming at you with knives all the time, and it feels like the other side is so dangerous, and in many cases, they are. But if you can't relate to them like another human being and say, I too am uncertain about some of these things, then you will never reach them as a human being in asking them to come over to a side of better understanding. So I think our only option is a step towards concession.
And when he talks about right there, that crisis of certainty, I think is really what struck me about kind of how we all approach these conversations. So I shared it with you. I know that you have some thoughts, and I want to get into that this week, Keith.
Yeah, I love, there's such an interesting element of Jordan Klepper's overall entertainment brand, right? That, he's out there, you say he's out there having conversations with at Trump rallies and things like that. He's got more of a Socratic gotcha approach, right? Like trying to providing entertainment to a particular audience. But what that has allowed him to do is really just do something that so many aren't these days, and that is really just engaging with the other side. And he says in that, like in the extended version of that clip, because people come to him now, right? Like they ask him questions like, how are you doing this? And I think that's such a cool element of that experience that he gets to share that we don't all see all that much. But he says later is like when the cameras aren't rolling, it's a very different environment, right? It's a very different thing, like shut the cameras off. And that element, even though it's not in that clip, is such a critical component to everything that we're discussing because none of us are doing this with the cameras on, right? But we're afraid to do it as if there are cameras on. We think we're going to get the entertainment response versus an actual engagement with another person.
And the constantness of it, I think, too, is very prescient, very something that even though you're not on camera with it, it's in the noise of the whole thing right now is very
and that noise creates more tension, which actually I think speaks to the crisis of certainty in a lot of ways, right? But man, isn't it true? Like, so we've talked about this a little bit, and we talk about it a lot in the work that we do, is what cognitive bias actually is and how it presents, right? Like the Dunning-Kruger effect is when you have certainty over something when you actually don't know all that much about it. We all experience it. We all think we know. We talked about this recently regarding the economy. Oh, I know so much about the economy, when really economics is not something that I studied. I still don't. I pick up the news and I hear experts talk about it. But I am no expert on the economy. But I feel like I am because, boy, that Dunning-Kruger effect is real. And then the flip side of the Dunning-Kruger effect is when you know a lot about something, you end up feeling like you actually don't know that much about it. So the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. But I also don't think that certainty is entirely the issue, right? It's go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Oh no, I was gonna say I hear that. I think that it's not entirely the certainty of it. It's the fear that operates a lot of it, regardless of where that source of that fear is from.
Yeah, and it's like it's not that you are certain about something that prevents you from engaging in an honest conversation. It's that we tend to be, because as we'll talk more about bias, we tend to just be certain on all things, and that tie to our conclusion, right? So it shuts us down on being able to actually hear what the other person has to say, right? He talks in that segment about you have to show up with conceding a point as a possibility, right? Like conceding that you might be wrong. And I don't agree with that entirely, right? I think it's about creating a space where you're open to learning something from the other person. It doesn't mean you have to say, I concede I am wrong. It means that, oh, you're right. Saying someone else is right doesn't mean that you're saying you're wrong. And that's what, in essence, a concession would be. Right? It's, oh, I'm actually listening to what you're saying, and I hear your point, and that point, that's valid. And that point might actually further inform your conclusion. So you're not conceding anything in that place, but you have to go into these spaces with these conversations with an opportunity that there is a potential to learn from this other person, regardless of how they start, right? Accepting that idea that maybe they can actually teach you something, even if their point, their broader conclusion is like entirely opposite. Therefore, they are wrong about everything.
Right. And people are
Right?
correct in some ways about their view of their experience, right? You can't take away their experience and their point of view from how they see those things. Like it's their lived experience.
Yeah. And so, when we go into these conversations, you talked about it with fear that they're going to say something that you're not prepared to rebut, right? Like, I'm not prepared to rebut this. I remember a conversation I was having with somebody, and he just randomly brought up, do you know where the term conspiracy theory came from? And I was like, no, I'm actually not. And he's like, well, what was it? Like in the 1960s, the CIA termed the word conspiracy theory in order to support some government propaganda or something like that, right? In order to get people on the side of whatever it is that they were trying to do. And I was like, okay, like I can't tell him he's wrong because I honestly don't know. It turns out he was. The history of conspiracy theory term goes back to the 1870s or 1860s, is when it was first used widely. But the idea that, like, when that happened, it's like I felt tense. Like, I can't have a conversation with this person because now they're presenting something. Now, we were watching the Super Bowl, and it wasn't the time to actually engage in the conversation. It was just some random discussion. But if we're intentional in these conversations and something like that happens, we don't have to feel tense about it, and we don't have to argue it. And I will tell you, I heard it, and then it gave me an opportunity to learn something. It didn't feel right to me, but I could go and research it, look it up, and see if that's true, right? And now I remember it, and it's a part of my
And you'll
informative
forever be like,
system.
now
Yeah,
I
if
know
I'm ever
where
in
the
that situation
yeah.
again, right? Now I'm
Aha.
prepared. But I'm likely not going to, right? And there was really no conclusion that was drawn from that other than just talking about the specifics.
And finally, a story about art, healing, and community. Shai Harrell is a musician and mindfulness advocate who turned her own journey through postpartum depression into a program that teaches kids how to use music as an emotional language. From her love for the violin to her approach to mindfulness, Shai shows us that sometimes the best way to process the noise of life is to listen for the beauty in it.
You can go back a little bit about your journey through the postpartum part, and like what were the tools kind of that you found, because I definitely hear this a lot from a lot of women. I know a lot of women that also work in this area, because there is a lot of like, it's just normal, you'll be fine, but not actually like, applying tools therein to help you manage it as you go. So what were the tools that you found worked for you?
Stillness. And that sounds crazy with a newborn. It's like, when do I have a chance to be still? But just really being intentional with being still. Even while you're breastfeeding your baby, just be still, close your eyes, take deep breaths, connect in that moment. When being intentional with my movement, being intentional with, okay, I don't need you to think about anything else right now, but feeding your baby. Don't think about anything else. Nothing else matters right now. I don't want you to think about anything else in this moment other than brushing your teeth. Because when I tell you, like, at my experience, and I'm sure other women hearing this, like, you'll skip steps. Sometimes I will turn around and look, and I have a whole sink full of dishes just done, and I don't remember doing them because I wasn't even present doing them. There's just so many different aspects of postpartum depression and just postpartum things that happen that, again, I don't think we talk enough about. And what you were saying is like, we aren't given the tools. It's like, oh, this will pass. Okay, but how? Like, what can I do to be actively doing something to help that emotion pass or to help that thing? And it's, So, yeah.
I think it's really important to emphasize this point that you made, because it is such a default nature, socialized in nature for us. I'm very careful. I don't want to just say it's natural for us to do it. No, this is a socialized element. It'll be okay. It's normal. You said it. When you're in it, fuck normal. Like, that's not helpful, right? And to your point, I think it's really just so important to emphasize, because we talk about this in the check-in, and we talk about like allowing people to just experience their emotions without having to create some sort of it's okay environment. We'll talk about this more with kids later, but like that sentiment of, oh, it's okay, you'll be fine, is so isolating. Because
It is.
what that's telling me is that I don't have anybody to help me through it. You're
Right.
telling me it's just going to be okay. Why don't you tell me, why don't you let me experience it? And then when I'm ready, I want to know how you got through it versus just telling me, yeah, you'll get there. It'll be good.
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
Yeah.
And there are places for that. Sometimes it's like, I cannot tell you what it's like to be sleep deprived. You literally just have to have a child, right? Like I can't prepare
Yeah.
you for that. Just
Yeah.
know it's gonna happen, and you gotta figure that one out, kind of thing, right? But to just say it's gonna be okay is so isolating. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because I just think it's so important to emphasize, like, saying those things leads to mental and emotional struggles for other people when you think you're actually being helpful. And it's
Yes.
wildly unhelpful.
So,
But that,
as we mentioned earlier too, oh, you have a question there, Keith?
yeah, I do have a question, but if you have a question, or if Shai has a
I've got
comment, like,
I got a ton of questions, but go ahead, drop
like
a question in there.
I would love to one of the things that I think is so interesting about mindfulness, pivoting back to that, is that there are oftentimes it's framed with meditation. Look, big fan of meditation. We talked to a guy a long time ago, back in the previous iteration, about using improv as a form of mindfulness. Like, there are different access points to it. I'm curious to understand how music enables it for you.
Music enables it for me because I speak and I feel through sound. I don't, and I know maybe a few people understand when I say this, and sometimes I feel, I don't know, I'm just gonna say how it makes me feel. But when people ask me, okay, well, what happened, or what feeling do you feel? Like, example, like I pinched a nerve in my back, like a few months ago, and when that happened, it was like, okay, well, what does that feel like? And I was like, well, it feels like, and I remember Juice was like, what? It feels like what? And I'm like, it feels like, and I was like, I don't know how to describe the feeling, but like, I know the sound that I hear, and like, I feel that sound. And he was like, okay. And then I shared it with my cousin, and she was like, okay, no, I kind of understand what you're saying. And I realized that that's actually how I maneuver through life a lot. When I talk about feelings, I do correlate it to sounds. And even when I talk to my kids, I correlate things to sound. And I think that it's important, what I share with the kids too about music and emotions is it helps to, when we watch movies, right? I'm like, you can tell by what sounds and what music they're playing right before something crazy is about to happen, right? You imagine watching a movie with no sound whatsoever, and you're only getting that visual. Like, music brings everything to life for me. And I think that teaching kids that, and just sharing that world, maybe not teaching them like this is something that you have to abide by, you have to go by, but just giving them that kind of freedom and creativity to explore their emotions, explore what that feels like, or how that correlates with sound, is just it's just a really helpful tool.
You know what else I think is super interesting about your program and about you as an artist is that you play violin, right? It's such a classical instrument. I mean, it's got thousands of years of history. It's like, one of the most noticeable instruments in the orchestra. Like when that violin starts ripping on a solo, everybody goes, hold on. You know what I mean? It just has that ability to reach you. So tell me about your journey with the instrument, especially being a Black woman. I'm sure there's not a ton of Black women violinists like floating around, but also how you feel it affecting other people, and how you work with that instrument in particular.
Yeah, my violin journey kind of started. I was fortunate; it started in about 5th grade, and I was at a school where they brought a bunch of instruments and was like, hey, everyone pick up an instrument. Which one do you want to play? And I was like, the violin. And my dad was like, this is going to be really hard. And I know from his point of view, it was like, this is going to be really hard. You got it. I'm going to support you. And he did. He's literally my like holy grail to the violin. But I just remember how it made me feel. I really cannot like describe it in words, just through sound, guys. But I can really just I really
The rest of this podcast is just
No, I want to hear it. I want to hear it now. What was it like? Oh, was it like choir angels? What was the sound that the violin made for you?
It was, I'm not. Don't do me like that, Gerren. I'm not here to entertain that. Okay. What I am here to say is that through the years, I actually, as a Black girl, it's interesting. A lot of people might say because I started with a bluegrass teacher. So my first private instruction, and really only private instruction, was through bluegrass. And I was so in awe of my teacher. Her nails were like, I don't know, like 4 or 5 inches long. Like,
Wow.
and she was playing so fast. And I was like, I want to be just like her. Like, hands down. She was just so dope to me. And I learned how to play bluegrass. I would go to different country festivals and I would be always the only Black girl there, the only Black girl playing her violin. And over time, like that never actually bothered me. I never actually started paying attention to it until high school, of course, when people started bringing it to my attention. Like, you're a Black girl who plays violin. That's weird. And I was definitely the kid that was always moving schools. So I was always looking to find like my tribe that I never got to stick to because we're constantly somewhere else. And my violin is something that always came with me. And then I kind of put it down when it stopped being cool and everyone's kind of in my like ear about it. And I was, just at that age where, again, like you want to fit in, you're just trying to find your way. And then I ended up moving to Atlanta, and that's when I started a really cool rap group. And I was like, okay, rapping is my profession. I'm going to be a superstar rapper and all the things. I ended up moving back to California. And this is kind of around the time that we linked up and we were all making music, we were producing. Like, there was just so much music surrounded. And it kind of really inspired me to be like, man, I don't need to pick up my violin again. And this is when I was a part of At Play Entertainment. And I think that was when I went on stage and I brought my violin back out. I rapped and then I brought my violin back out. And bringing my violin out at that show, I was like, why have I not done this before? And people were like, what, you think you're going to rap and play the violin? I was like, yo, yes, I am. I don't know what that's going to do for the world, but it's doing something for me and I'm here for it. And I just kind of built from there.
So that's our show for this week. 3 different conversations, 1 shared truth. Connection is something that we build moment by moment. If any of these moments hit home for you, let me know in the comments, share it with a friend, or better yet, start one of these conversations yourself. Because More in Common starts with more in conversation. We'll see you next time.